somewhere inside you right now is a version of yourself capable of something you would swear on your life you'd never do. In 1961, a man walked into a small room in New Haven, Connecticut. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't cruel. He was an accountant, a teacher, somebody's neighbor. Within the hour, he believed, genuinely believed, that he had killed a complete stranger with his own hands, not because he wanted to, because a man in a lab coat calmly told him to keep going. This isn't a story about a monster. This is a story about you. Ask yourself honestly, would you have stopped? Most people watching this right now are certain the answer is yes. The data says otherwise. 2 out of 3 people in that exact room did not stop. Because evil was never a personality type. It was never a small population of broken people, safely separate from the rest of us. It's a switch, wired into ordinary human beings, and it flips under conditions that are far easier to create than you think. The right room, the right uniform, the right permission. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to find out exactly which conditions flip that switch in you. And you're probably not going to like the answer. That man in New Haven was a real participant in what's now called the Milgram obedience experiment, run by Yale psychologist Stanley Milgram. The setup was simple. A participant was told to play teacher, asking questions to a learner in another room. Every wrong answer, the teacher had to deliver an electric shock, increasing in voltage each time, all the way up to a label that simply read XXX, danger, severe shock. The learner was an actor. The shocks weren't real. But the participant didn't know that. All they knew was the screaming coming through the wall, and the man in the lab coat standing beside them, calmly repeating 4 words. Please continue. The experiment requires it. Milgram expected almost no one to go all the way. Psychiatrists he consulted predicted maybe 1 in 1,000 would reach the maximum voltage. The real number was different, 65%. 2 out of every 3 ordinary people in a controlled room with no threat to themselves delivered what they believed was a lethal shock to another human being, because someone with authority told them to. Milgram wasn't testing cruelty, he was testing obedience. And what he found is that most human beings will hand over their moral compass to whoever seems to be in charge, especially if that person takes responsibility off their shoulders. I was just following orders isn't a coincidence of history. It's a documented, repeatable psychological default. Here's the part that should actually disturb you. The people who administered those shocks didn't feel like villains while they were doing it. Many were visibly distressed, sweating, laughing nervously, begging the experimenter to stop the study, and they kept pressing the button anyway. That gap in between what someone feels and what someone does is where all of this begins. 10 years later, a psychologist named Zimbardo wanted to push the question further. Milgram showed that people obey authority. Zimbardo wanted to know what happens when you just give people a role. No orders, no lab coat commanding them, just a costume and a job title. He took a basement at Stanford University, turned it into a mock prison, and split a group of psychologically healthy, average college students into 2 groups, guards and prisoners. No one told the guards to be cruel. They were simply given uniforms, mirrored sunglasses and batons, and told to maintain order. Within 36 hours, 1 prisoner had a breakdown. By day 2, guards were forcing prisoners to do push-ups, stripping them naked, using solitary confinement as punishment, and inventing degrading rituals, none of which they were instructed to do. The study was scheduled to run 2 weeks. It was shut down after 6 days because the situation had spiraled into genuine psychological abuse. Zimbardo later called this the Lucifer effect. The idea that ordinary healthy people can be transformed into perpetrators of cruelty, not because of who they are, but because of the situation they're placed in. Give someone a uniform, anonymity, and a system that removes accountability, and the line between good and evil starts to blur faster than most of us would like to admit. And this is the part that separates this from a one-off. Zimbardo went on to consult on real-world cases, including the Abu Ghraib prison abuse scandal decades later, and found the same fingerprints. Not monstrous individuals, ordinary soldiers in a broken system, with no oversight and full permission to dehumanize the people in front of them. The uniform doesn't just hide who you are. Sometimes it replaces it. In 1961, the same year as Milgram's experiment, a Nazi officer named Adolf Eichmann was put on trial in Jerusalem. Eichmann had organized the logistics of the Holocaust. The trains, the schedules, the paperwork that moved millions of people toward their deaths. Everyone expected a monster, a sadist, someone whose face matched the scale of what he'd done. Instead, the philosopher Hannah Arendt, who covered the trial, described something far more unsettling. Eichmann wasn't a raving fanatic. He was, in her words, terrifyingly normal. A bureaucrat, a man obsessed with career advancement and procedure, who spoke in cliches and seemed almost incapable of thinking from anyone else's point of view. He didn't hate the people he sent to their deaths. He simply stopped seeing them as people who mattered to his task. Arendt coined a term for this that still unsettles people today: the banality of evil. Her argument wasn't that evil requires a monster. It's that most large-scale evil in history has been committed not by monsters, but by ordinary people who stopped thinking, who followed procedure, climbed the ladder, and outsourced their conscience to the system around them. This is the uncomfortable inversion of what most of us assume. We want evil to look like something: a face, a growl, a warning sign. But history keeps showing us that it usually looks like a man doing his job, filling out forms, meeting a quota, going home for dinner afterward. If evil required monsters, it would be rare. It's not rare because it doesn't require monsters at all. It only requires people who stop asking the one question that matters: what am I actually doing right now and to whom? So if evil doesn't require monsters, how does an ordinary mind actually make the jump? Psychologist Albert Bandura spent decades studying exactly this, and he identified a set of mental tools, what he called mechanisms of moral disengagement, that let normal people do harmful things without feeling like bad people while they do it. The tools are almost boringly simple. You rename the act a collateral damage instead of dead civilians. You compare it to something worse. It's nothing compared to what they did. You diffuse the responsibility. I was just one small part of a much bigger system. You dehumanize the target. Reduce them to a label, a number, a category, so that empathy has nothing left to grab onto. None of these require a villain's mindset. They require a vocabulary. And the terrifying efficiency of these mechanisms is that they don't numb your morality. They redirect it. You still feel like a good person. You just no longer see what you're doing as the kind of thing a good person needs to feel bad about. This is why the descent is so gradual and so hard to notice from the inside. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to become cruel. They take one small step that feels justified, then another, each slightly worse than the last, but never quite crossing whatever line they've drawn for themselves. Because the line keeps quietly moving with them. Here's why this isn't just history. You don't need a lab coat or a war to see moral disengagement at work. You can find it running quietly through completely ordinary modern life. Think about how easy it is to say something online you'd never say to a person's face. That's diffusion of responsibility and dehumanization working together. A username instead of a face, a comment section instead of a conversation. Think about corporate scandals, where entire teams knowingly ship a harmful product because each individual person's job was just their small piece of the process. Nobody felt like the villain. Everybody was just doing their part. Even cancel culture, ironically, runs on the same psychological engine it claims to be fighting. A crowd that would never individually confront a stranger will happily pile onto them online because the group provides exactly what Milgram's lab coat provided: permission and diffusion. I'm just one voice in a much bigger reaction feels very different from I am personally doing this to this person, even when the outcome is identical. And this is really the point of everything we've covered. The line between good people and cruel outcomes was never about personality. It's about systems, permission structures, distance, and language. The exact conditions that let ordinary minds stop asking the one uncomfortable question: what am I actually doing right now and to whom? The unsettling truth is that most of history's darkest chapters weren't built by a small number of evil masterminds. They were built by millions of people who simply never stopped to ask that question. because the system around them made sure they never had to. So where does that leave us? If Milgram, Zimbardo, and Arendt all point to the same conclusion, it's this: the capacity for cruelty isn't rare. It isn't reserved for a specific type of person. It's a dormant setting inside ordinary human wiring, one that activates under very specific, very repeatable conditions: authority telling you it's fine, a role that hides your identity, distance from the consequences, and language that renames what you're doing into something easier to live with. That's genuinely uncomfortable to sit with. It's much more comforting to believe evil lives in other people, in monsters, in history, in someone else's decisions. But the actual research says the opposite. It says the line is thinner than any of us want to admit, and the only real defense isn't moral superiority. It's vigilance. The people who refused to press the button in Milgram's experiment weren't smarter or braver in some abstract sense. They just kept asking the question everyone else stopped asking. They noticed the moment where responsibility was being quietly handed off, and they refused to let it go. That's really the only lesson here, and it's a small one, but it might be the most important one you hear all year. The next time something feels easier because everyone else is doing it, or it's not really my decision, or I'm just one small part of this, that is exactly the moment to slow down. That's not a coincidence. That's the switch, right there, waiting to be flipped. Whether it gets flipped is still up to you. But here's the part that should really keep you up tonight. Knowing all of this doesn't make you immune to it. Milgram's participants weren't uneducated. Zimbardo's guards weren't sociopaths. Reading about the switch doesn't disconnect the wiring. It just buys you a 2-second head start, and only if you're actually paying attention when it matters. So the next time you catch yourself thinking everyone else is doing it, don't scroll past that thought. That's not background noise. That is, quite literally, the exact moment this entire video was about. If you want to keep testing what you think you know about human nature, because I promise you, most of it is wrong, that's exactly what this channel is for.